Right, so here we are. Michael D. Shaw is here as he is often on Friday at 3 p.m. live. We are live on YouTube, but most significantly, we're live on Rumble, which is the flagship station. Mike, a lot going on right now. I wanted to start out by discussing the obvious big. Wait, hold on. Let me just go live on TikTok. There we go. The obvious big question of the year, I would even suggest, and it's something that I think came as quite a bit of a shock, and that is the leaked Supreme Court manuscript indicating that Roe versus Wade is about to be overturned. I heard some very good analysis of this of all places, the New York Times. Sometimes I listen to their podcast, The Daily, with Michael Barbaro. Just, as a way of getting a handle on what the Eastern Seaboard liberal establishment is thinking and what they're talking about. And they did a pretty balanced, sometimes they say things that conservatives can't say. Their segment on Dominion Software, for example, they said things that I'd be banned if I said. But in this case, they have on a pretty solid guy, this John Litwick. I guess that he had been Yale Law School graduate. He'd been in private practice at a big fancy, soft shoe law firm for many years. Then he's
I think the term is a white shoe, but okay.
Thank you. Yes. Have to get my okay. And then he, he's been writing for the New York Times for years, analyzing Supreme Court decisions, and he had a pretty good handle. He went over like a line by line analysis. He has a good understanding of the thinking of the different justices, and he knew all about how Alito thinks about things. And he kind of right off the bat dispelled some of the propaganda that's going to ooze out of the left in response to this thing. But before we go there, what is your take on it?
I think that even if Ruth Ginsburg, in fact, I mentioned that, I'm not the only one who mentioned it, but I mentioned in my article on this, that if she thought it was a crummy decision, then who am I to argue? I mean, legal wise,
right?
It was absurdly a bad decision. It was legislation from the bench.
Yes.
Possibly one of the worst examples of that in the history of the court. The argument was made in, I believe, by Rehnquist, that if the 14th Amendment was controlling over abortion, which was a major argument in Roe, then how do you explain the fact that there were 36 states and territories that already had laws on the books decades before the 14th Amendment about abortion, and none of these were affected or even mentioned? So I think that, what motivated Alito to do it at this time, who knows? But if you want a law, you got to pass a law. Otherwise, it's a function of the states. So it was a terrible decision when it came out, and maybe they're in the mode now where they want to try to clean up some of the mess. But here's a pro tip: that is by no means the only bad Supreme Court decision.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So, and that's something that's brought up by the opponents of this. They go, well, what about the other overreaches? But it's one of those decisions that, as you say, everyone acknowledges that it was very flawed, and that Blackmun discovered emanations and penumbras.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, he made it up. But the point is that since that decision,
but the other guys went along with them. See, that
they did. They must have, at least. I don't know what the vote was, but
7-2.
Okay, but I think it's safe to say that since that happened, it has really twisted politics and Supreme Court nominations, and starting with Ted Kennedy, getting rid of Bork, and just everything has hinged on it on all sides, because there's been like a way to try to preserve it, and it has been in place for 50 years and always has been. I mean, we never heard the end of it. In a way, it's a relief that they finally pulled the plug on it. The bottom line, however, is that the decision does not, we should be clear, it does not end abortion. It does not end legal abortion. What it does is and Alito was very careful about that. He didn't get into, the actual nuts and bolts of Roe versus Wade. And he didn't talk about like right to privacy, nothing like that. He simply, he said that this is a jurisdictional issue. It doesn't belong in the Supreme Court. It doesn't belong in the federal government. Tradition holds that questions of life generally are decided by the states, whether it be abortion or death penalty,
right.
Euthanasia, whatever it is. And that he also is very clear in very direct language, because the left is pushing this. This is going to lead to an end of gay marriage, and it's going to be back to ending racial marriages. Alito is very clear about that. He's like, this decision only applies to life, nothing more and nothing less. And he specifically says living fetal tissue in the womb, nothing more and nothing less. So the idea, and Litwack from the New York Times responded by saying it is highly unlikely that any decisions are going to be challenged, based on this decision. And even if it were, we're talking like down the road, like a generation, maybe some nut might do it. But the fact is that this whole line of propaganda is not real. It is a decision that stands on its own merits. It doesn't undo anything else. And that basically the other thing I want to say is that a lot is being said about how most Americans support Roe versus Wade.
That's never been true, by the way.
Well, I think that, let's, even for the sake of argument, say it is true. The fact of the matter is that because most Americans may support legal abortion, or not most, I would say maybe a little more than half, that doesn't mean that, if you kind of open the lens a little and look at that, it's also true that most of people who do support legal abortion do not support, like, day before birth, kind of thing, and, on demand. And, there's one bill in California, apparently, where these two legislators want to legalize abortion 2 weeks after the baby's born.
Right.
They don't support that. And also the heartbeat legislation in Texas and in other states, that is supported by a fairly large segment of pro-choice people. What that is basically is that once, after maybe 14, 15, 16 weeks into the pregnancy, when the baby has a heartbeat and is viable, then the state can step in and intervene, and there can be, regulation. That's all that says. It doesn't actually ban all abortion. So we're going to hear, I think, a lot of very shrill propaganda. Oh, it's a banning all abortion from the moment of conception. I don't think it does. And I predict that that states are not going to do that. I just don't see it, because state legislators tend to be very moderate bodies. You might have, extremes on both sides. On the one side, complete total ban of all abortions, including, life of mother. On the other side, you could have kill the baby 2 weeks after it's born. Those things generally don't make it through a state legislature, whether that state be liberal or conservative, because state legislators are made up of people from all sides, and there's a lot of negotiation and deliberation. So I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that there's just going to be some states, like my own state of Massachusetts, where nothing will happen. They already have abortion laws. It's just, that's the way, that's the culture of my state. Whereas other states, maybe at most, they may implement the heartbeat law, which I think is perfectly moral, and it's perfectly right, for God's sakes. Right? That's, and that's what the people want. And this all comes down to the principle of democracy. That's how democracy functions in a republic. You have legislators who craft laws. So when the left likes to scream about democracy, guess what? That's what's happening now. Democracy, a return of power to the states and to the people, which is what President Trump was all about. Taking power away from the elites, the unelected elites, like judges and bureaucracies, and returning it to the people. The states represent the people because they elect representatives locally and they craft laws to represent their views.
Well, that's all right. I would point out that I don't think this leak is completely about abortion. I think that the left is desperate to find some rallying cause. And this, at first blush, seems to be a good one, although I don't think it is, because it's another one of these issues where they think that because there's 5 people on Twitter, or old Twitter, let's go,
Right.
that hold a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing about the abortion issue is that the most fervent supporters of it seem to be women beyond childbearing years. If you actually go to legit demonstrations, as opposed to the fake ones that appeared at the drop of a hat with pre-printed signs and hired demonstrators,
Mm-hmm.
you will find, because I have friends in the pro-life movement that have told me this over the years, that the average person who is counter-picketing the pro-life people at the abortion mill are women in their 60s, plus or minus.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder, well, what is their dog in that fight?
Mm-hmm.
And with their dog in that fight, like Nancy Pelosi being the most ridiculous example, is someone who's old, who has 5 kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why in the world would she be such a heavy supporter? Well, because they think their life could have been even better if they weren't cursed with these kids.
Hmm.
But the thing is, I don't think it's a heavy grassroots issue. I think they're so desperate to find something to take away from there isn't much publicity on how bad Biden is. It's still not being covered in the media to any great extent.
Right.
They know there's going to be a bloodbath in the midterms, and they're trying to find something, anything. It's going to backfire. It always does.
Well, that's the question I wanted to ask you. I mean, is this, I mean, I'm listening to, the liberals on MSNBC. I mean, I want to check out what they're saying. They're all like, rubbing their hands together and thinking, oh, this is going to destroy the Republicans in the midterms, that they have all the momentum, especially, by the way, just to mention that this last primary, this last week, every candidate endorsed by President Trump won.
Oh, yeah.
And there's another one coming up in 2 weeks, and some big ones like in New York and in Pennsylvania. And I think that, and also Arizona. And the biggest one, of course, is Georgia, to get rid of Kemp. But I think that if the Trump people win those, that's going to be an earthquake. I mean, they're already covering this whole thing up. They got J.D. Vance, who was endorsed by Trump, who came out from really way behind and won. And really the only thing that changed was the Trump endorsement. So, but putting that aside, do you think that this is not going to hurt Republicans? I mean, and what about everyone's jumping in and speculating on this one, but how did the leak happen? Because this was unprecedented. I don't think this has ever happened before.
Okay, let me point something out. It's not unprecedented.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. And in fact, that came out about 2 days after this unprecedented leak. The very Roe v. Wade decision was leaked to Time magazine in 1973 by a law clerk, I believe, of Lewis Powell. And
did they publish it?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
And now it's not, let's be clear, it's not exactly the same. This is a decision, not a draft. This is a decision that was going to be released in a day or so. And it's funny that nobody cared. Again, because it was the liberal point of view.
Right.
But these people that are going around saying it's unprecedented, maybe it's unprecedented that a draft decision was released, but no, The other
Well, how does the liberals gain by having it released?
time. I mean, who
We
knows
time
how?
to then pressure the judges I mean, on the one hand, the justices that their names have been revealed as having signed on to this, it kind of locks them in now because they can't change their mind. It would really look badly.
Well,
On the other,
and by the way, you're the only person who's mentioned that.
okay,
And but look how beautiful that point is. Wow, we're going to intimidate them. Really? I have a lifetime appointment,
yeah.
and you already said how I'm going to vote, so I'd be an idiot if I were going to change
Plus,
it
on the
now.
other hand, I mean, just on a personal level, things are ugly right now. They've had to go into hiding. There's some radical group that released their addresses.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? I mean, here you have, I mean, like particularly like Amy Coney Barrett, she's got young children at home. I mean, this is like, it's one thing for these others who are probably retired and they live in some gated community, but this is like, it's pretty ugly stuff to have
Well,
that.
that's why it's going to backfire, because
Okay.
what they don't seem to realize is most people don't like these fascist tactics. Okay. Most people aren't Bolsheviks. Newsflash to the left. Most people aren't Bolsheviks. Okay. They don't care for this sort of thing. And Jan Psaki stupidly saying that people should protest at the homes of these justices, which she
Oh
did.
my God, did she say that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, that's like,
Oh, she's a total disaster. I
I
mean,
know.
so what they're doing is the veil is being dropped on any of these people. I mean, but what was your first clue when Chucky Schumer a few years ago said that what was the term he used?
Now you'll reap the harvest or something.
Reap the whirlwind.
The whirlwind, yeah. I'll show you,
Yeah,
Kavanaugh.
reap the whirlwind.
I'll show you, Gorsuch. He's like, it's like acting like a little, old, like an old commie. I mean,
Yeah,
waving his.
well, reap the whirlwind is funny because that's a biblical statement, of course. Not that Charles Schumer has the slightest
I
idea
don't think so.
about what's in the Bible, but so I think it's just another case of them jumping the shark, to use another expression. But on the other hand, within the echo chamber of the liberal media, they think this is great because they will go to their grave thinking that everybody is as bullshit as they are. And
it's going to be very interesting. I mean, I actually think that it's going to blow over and they're going to realize that most people don't care. That people, who have states like Massachusetts where they are pro-abortion, they'll continue onward as pro-abortion, and the states that aren't won't. That's how democracy works. And I think that it's going to be like a few days of gnashing of teeth and, waving of hands. And maybe they'll send out some of their goon squads, like with the Antifa and others, to maybe rough a few people up like Lenin used to do with the Cheka. But I think that,
it's funny how that Bolshevik stuff keeps coming up, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think that's going to fly. I mean, and they've got nothing else. This is the midterms could be the most historic defeat that the Democrats have ever had. I mean, it could be like the election of 1933, which actually defeated the Republicans and brought in Franklin Roosevelt. The Republicans didn't recover from that for 30 years.
Yeah.
They really didn't come back until maybe Nixon. I mean, Eisenhower was a Republican, but he was very liberal. It really, these are seismic changes in the way this country is governed, and
Let's
in
take
our
a
politics.
tangent on that because what is your opinion on the election of actually 32? The conventional wisdom is, well, Herbert Hoover didn't understand that depression was bad and blah, blah, blah. But how much of it did it have to do with the fact that the Republicans favored prohibition and the Democrats didn't?
A lot. The prohibition was, I mean, I actually mentioned this in my book. It was the first sort of national kind of social experiment. Right. In terms of how, like in a way, it was like a precursor to the pandemic-led national legislation to decide whether or not people could have a drink. I mean, this is really a direct intervention by the federal government into the private lives of citizens. It was in an unprecedented level. Now, I mean, before that, you could have a dry state or a dry community. You still do. I think Utah is a dry state. That's fine. But that was, in a way, that was the Roe versus Wade of its time, right? The federal government is going to come in and it's going to wipe out all the state laws and all of the democratic, created laws in the states, and it's going to impose a national social agenda. In that case, it was banning alcohol. In this case, it's allowing abortion. So yeah, I think that had a huge backlash. It's interesting that that election, Roosevelt actually ran on the right. He was criticizing Hoover.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, Hoover was the big government guy. Hoover was the one who was trying to bring in the state to do all these programs, and that FDR was going to cut taxes and lower the budget. He actually did, in a way. I mean, back then, he was like, one of the first things he did when he was elected, he went to every single cabinet and he said, you're going to have to cut your expenses by 5%. I don't care how you do it. It has to be done, and it has to be done in 2 months. I mean, he actually did this. It was one of the things, I mean, there's some aspects of the New Deal that are pretty interesting. So I think that Hoover was actually seen as an inept big government, kind of a sellout. He completely turned his back on the principles that had been espoused by Harding and Coolidge.
But I mean, what's funny about this is you're a student of history and you know that. But I promise you, if you went to the average person and said, who was more conservative between Hoover and FDR?
Well, that's right. That's because, I mean, in hindsight, it was kind of a crafting of the narrative. And of course, one of the things, and I want to be careful getting into this, with regard to crafting the narrative now, is that we now have an unprecedented level of political censorship. And I'm just going to give one quick example. I'm even nervous bringing it up because, they're going through some of my old archives and finding reasons to give me strikes. And I've pointed out that I'm very careful to state that when I get into something, I do it as an opinion, not as a fact. I'm not presenting a theory. I'm simply
You're not even allowed to have opinions.
Well, that's just it. But I'm gonna venture out here and just note that Dinesh D'Souza has a new movie out. I'm sure you've heard of it, 2,000 Mules. Yeah. Now, we're not going to get into the details of this movie, but it is a very powerful statement. And President Trump just ran it at Mar-a-Lago. He had a lot of people over to watch with him. It is a sensational piece of work. And I only bring it up because it's being censored. It's not being allowed in theaters. Now, I understand people will tell me, well, a theater is a private company, fine. But the fact is that they are being pressured by the government and by the oligarchy, if you will, to ban this movie and to not discuss it. And people who are discussing the details of it are having their stations banned. Now, look, I mean, this has been going on since Trump, since the election and since the so-called quote unquote insurrection,
right,
used as an excuse. But I'm just sick and tired of the censorship. I mean, it's so un-American.
Well, I mean, and it backfires also because remember back in the 1950s, if a movie was banned in Boston, that was a sure ticket to success.
Oh yeah, sure. Banned in Boston list. They used to come out with, and that was just Boston. That wasn't the whole country. And also, we might note that the left used to be a champion of fighting this. I think that when Michael Moore came out with his movie about Bush, there was like one small theater that didn't want to show it, and there was like, oh my God, I mean, there's a national outrage and protests and rallies. Now you don't hear crickets, and this is a national ban. This is exactly what they did in Nazi Germany. I'm sorry to bring up the old canard there, but too bad. This is what they would do. They would decide, the theaters were privately owned, sure. But they would intimidate theaters to show and not show certain pieces of propaganda. And that's exactly what's happening now. And it's the same clique that ran that country that's running this country right
Yeah,
now.
well, the only difference is you don't have to go to a movie theater to see a movie anymore.
Well, that's right, but they're making it difficult throughout across the board. I mean, Dinesh D'Souza has set up, he's had to do these sort of unusual things to get the movie circulated. And there's a blackout in terms of discussing it in any of the mainstream media, including Fox. And
Oh, yeah.
and look, I mean, I get the fact that this movie is a sensational piece of documentary that has we can't even discuss what's in it because I'll be banned. Let's suffice to say, check it out for yourself, right? You'll see things very differently if you do. Not that you, and I'm saying
Well,
this.
that's not the only topic. I mean, there's
No. And I'm saying this to all the normies
Right.
people
Well, no,
like
I
you
mean,
and I, we know
but-
everything about this anyway.
Yeah. But I mean, the other thing is that probably subject to as great or even greater censorship is the whole COVID situation.
Oh, yes, of course, and the
but
vaccines, but we
on the
can't
other
even
hand-
mention that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, how successful has that been in that those who want to know can find out?
Yeah, but most people are, as I just described, they're normies. They're not
Yeah.
like you and I. They don't want to know, or if they do, they don't really. They're too. I don't want to use the word stupid, but I would use the
Okay,
word.
devil's advocate. Suppose
narrow.
2,000 Mules was available for every streaming and every movie theater in the country. There's still be
there
these
would be a
so-called
revolution.
normies wouldn't be interested in seeing it because
Well,
it's not a Marvel superhero.
But there might be enough who might be.
Yeah, well,
You know what I mean? It's not
you
going to
would
reach.
You'd reach more people. But
It's not going to reach beyond people who already understand what's in it, and that's the problem. And it's going to take it's going to have to be a person-to-person thing to reach the normies and say, look, you want to see what I'm thinking? Just see this one thing this once. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, Dennis Prager attended the filming at Mar-a-Lago, and he was very skeptical and he didn't want to get into it, but he came out of it saying, yep, this was, I think very differently now. And that's why they're suppressing it. And it's just so, it's so nasty in this country that this would be happening. This is the United States of America.
well, I mean,
You
I
can't
have to
suppress
say,
speech like that.
let me be a little cynical here. I agree completely with what you're saying, but there's always been censorship. Back in and it was more cultural censorship. There was a book that came out in the early 1960s, I believe, called None Dare Call It Treason.
Oh yeah, sure. By I have that by who was it? Skosin?
I forget his name.
Okay, yeah.
And even though that book was readily available, you weren't supposed to read it because it was some lunatic that wrote it and so on.
Yeah.
And
But they sold 1 million copies.
yeah, so I think that there's always been the tendency of the elites.
That's true. That's true. It's always been there, but maybe it's particularly frustrating now because of maybe the internet and that it poses as this great forum for free expression and free speech. And then, there was a little window of opportunity where there was a good deal of free speech, and then it was cracked down on. So it's very disappointing. It's maybe disappointing to me personally because I was launching this whole thing and I was putting together everything, and then everything got shut down. And I've been put behind the 8 ball. So, it
Well,
could
I
be
mean, you are a kind of purist about this, that
yeah.
you were in talk radio, and what was more free expression than that? And to see these institutions crumble, I'm more of a cynical observer and could see that even if you could present live video, so to speak, to people, they're still not going to believe their eyes, because so much of this is a preconceived notion. And then on the case of COVID for a second, even if you presented irrefutable data, now they have to choose between, am I going to believe this institution that I'm supposed to support for my entire life, or am I going to believe these dissidents? And that's why change sometimes takes generations.
No, I agree with you. I mean, there's a psychological phenomenon where people, it's like, I suppose it's confirmation bias, or it's, there's other words for this, where people are going to see what they want to see, and they're not going to see what they don't want to see. A lot. I mean, this does not apply to a lot of people. Like, I think you and I are not in that category. I mean, we like to see all sides of an issue and try to get more opposition. That's why I listen to the New York Times. I mean, we want to hear everything and think about it and integrate the knowledge and change when we get new information that doesn't, that contradicts. But most people, they get fixated, they get calcified usually at a younger age, maybe when college age, and everything goes through a certain sieve.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's true. But even in that context, if there was more free speech, you would shave off a few. You would get like a couple of people would wake up and think differently. Even people in that, I mean, maybe I'm being overly, optimistic here, and even maybe a little Pollyanna-ish, but, I think that ultimately people are, the truth comes out, right? Ultimately, I mean, you talk about none dare call it conspiracy, which had a huge impact. Right now, you have this book about Anthony Fauci that's having that kind of an impact. I interviewed.
And it's been suppressed. They try to suppress it like hell. I read somewhere that it's one of the highest selling books that has been banned from every bestseller list.
Yeah.
So and of course, here's the other thing. How would you know if it's making an impact? Because the New York Times certainly isn't going to run an article saying, based on Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s book, the people that hate Tony Fauci, I guess, have been proven right. So, I mean, that story isn't going to come out for the next 30, 40 years, probably.
Well, I mean, I just interviewed Tony Lyons, who's the publisher at Skyhorse Publishing, who published the book about Anthony Fauci.
Right.
And is a longtime friend of RFK Jr. And he has one of the best-selling books in the country, and yet the New York Times, with their quote bestseller list, doesn't list it, and he can't even buy an ad in the New York Times.
Well, okay, let's be fair. That's not the first book that they intentionally banned from their bestseller list.
That's true.
I'm not saying that makes it right.
No, I know what you mean. I remember Rush Limbaugh's books were banned, and his books were huge sellers.
Yeah,
I get it.
So
but this is particularly troubling because this book gets into real, the real nuts and bolts of a corruption in the medical establishment, and the thing that bugs me. I mean, then they're attacking RFK Jr. personally. They're smearing him. This is, from the great scone of the Kennedy family. I mean, he doesn't have anything to gain by doing this. He's always making money. Bull crap. He's not making a dime. All the money goes to this charity, the Children's Defense Fund. He doesn't need the money. I mean, he lives on a trust fund. This is like, it's so blatantly wrong that, it's one thing, for some nut to come up and get a bestseller. This is like a real, it's brilliantly researched, brilliantly footnoted, and it is legitimate political opinion. This isn't, I mean, Fauci and them, they've never refuted a word of it. There's never been a lawsuit. There's never been a question about it.
No, there never will be.
No. So, I mean, this is like this, I mean, we could talk about degrees and nuances of censorship. Yeah, it's always been there. Back in the 60s, you got all the news from the big three, right? And you had, Walter Cronkite, who we now know was a real left winger, according to his biographer, Douglas Brinkley, who kind of spilled the beans on him. And he would come up and he would intone, this is the way it is. And I mean, he talked like with the Kennedy assassination, he was the mouthpiece of the deep state. I mean, this was a lone assassin, nothing more to see here, nothing more going on. And anybody who questions that thesis, is a conspiracy theory nut. That was maybe in a way, I mean, I suppose back then the censorship was worse because look at the kind of power that he had, that he could come out and make that pronouncement like that.
Well, then people were conditioned to believe it because it's on TV.
But people didn't believe it. I mean, people.
Well, but it's the same thing. There were a certain number of people that didn't, but he was the most trusted man in America for X amount of time. But see, I got the story on him at a young age, and it's ironic how it came through. My parents knew a guy who was a contemporary of Cronkite and Wallace in CBS radio days. And he hated those two guys for the reason that he said the only way that they were able to move on to TV and create these careers for themselves, this guy was left-winger. I mean, he made no bones about it.
Sure.
But he said they were at least as left-wing as him, but they lied about it their whole lives. And so did Paley.
Oh, they all did. And Sarnoff. I mean, they were marketed, they marketed them.
Yeah, they created this career, but I found out as a teenager that this guy was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Not that I'm going to do anything about it, but then it made me question all this stuff. And I had this rebellious nature anyway. I didn't want to believe half the things that were going on, but it's so much easier to hold with the narrative. And it's not just politics. I referenced in one of my articles, I don't know if you ever heard a guy named, he's deceased now, Wilson Bryan Key, wrote a number of books on what he called subliminal seduction.
Oh yeah, sure. I read one of those.
Okay. Yeah. We became friendly. This is pre-internet, so it was all, for your younger viewers, they had these things called letters that you send in the mail that you wrote. And he tells the story. He was at University of Western Ontario. He was contemporary of Marshall McLuhan.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Anyway, he would see hidden meanings. And there's a famous painting by Picasso called The Dream. And if you take a look at that painting for 10 seconds, you realize what the woman's dream is about. The phallic symbolism in the painting is overwhelming. But somehow, it was not correct opinion in the art community to quite interpret it that way. So he had a friend, we'd known this guy for, I think, 30 years, who was an art professor. And he happened to make some comment about, yeah, take that painting, talk about subliminal seduction. And I guess to coin a phrase from Acts, the scales fell from his eyes or something, and he saw this obvious sexual symbolism in this painting.
Right.
And it destroyed their friendship because he realized, how could I have been such an idiot? And it was your fault, Bill Key. And
sure, I mean, but there's symbolisms like that everywhere. If you want to see a phallic symbol, check out the logo for Amazon. Once you see it, you can't
unsee it.
Right. So just next time look up Amazon and tell me. Anyway, I remember reading Subliminal Seduction, and it had a big impact on my thinking at a pretty young age, in that the ad agencies would create commercials with images hidden into like they would show like a glass of scotch, and they would do things with the ice cubes to make them, it appeals to your subconscious mind. And, they would put these images in there that might be either sexual or violent. And somehow they would actually make people want to do it. And the other thing that they discovered was in movies, they would flash like literally like 2 second images. Right. yeah, right. Have popcorn or whatever. And it would be like these flashed images that would go right into your subconscious and you wouldn't know it, but then all of a sudden you'd feel hungry. And a lot of those things were actually banned after those books came out, but not all. And, we don't know what's in things today, but I mean, look, this is a really interesting subject. I've gotten into this with a few guests over time about some of the imagery and symbolism that's drenching society and
Yeah.
always has, that secret groups will put in different stuff that they see it and they know what it means, but the average person doesn't know what it means. I would suggest that because we don't know what it means, it really doesn't mean anything, but it's still very interesting. I mean, I don't want to go, let's not go too far down the rabbit hole, but I remember years ago, I did a show with this guy who did an analysis of the American dollar bill and some of the symbolism on that. And it was hilarious.
Yeah.
What's on that thing. I mean, you could see little owls cropping up along the leaves on the side. And you look at this thing and he shows you, and I have the bill out and I'm like, holy mackerel, this is incredible.
Well, you could put that bill under heavy magnification and see the names of all these states on the, I believe, Treasury building and so on. So you could argue, well, that was, so it'd be so difficult to duplicate.
Sure.
But on the other hand, why have all those?
Well, there's just stuff. I mean, there's Masonic symbolism. I mean, that's no secret, especially in Washington, D.C. And there's other symbolism. I mean, it all has its own meanings for the people who it means something to, but most of us it doesn't. But I mean, I don't want to go too far here, but the new IRS building in Washington, check it out. Let's leave it at that.
All right.
Check out some of the statuary that's on the front lawn. Anyways.
Wow.
Not
that you've been making a study of it.
Not that I'm doing anything. Look, it's an interesting subject. I'm not going to deny the fact that I haven't dabbled in it a little bit here and there. Sociologist C. Wright Mills, who I respect a lot, and as a student of sociology, I read his book, The Power Center. He talks about this. He talks about the history of it and the totems, he calls it, and the different symbols and what they do to the mind and the society as a whole. So, this isn't something I'm just making up.
Well, it doesn't only have to be a graphic symbol. It can be, I mean, abortion itself takes on a symbolic meaning somehow.
Right.
And of course, the promotion of it in the Black community is just downright unbelievable when you have virtually genocidal levels of abortion that are being performed. It's mostly Black women that get abortions overall, and how this somehow is promoted. And then, of course, the latest statement was this Tedros character of WHO claiming that abortion saves lives, which I thought was.
This is a bizarre one. I think it was this very left-wing reporter, Amakar, I forget her name, but she, right after the release of the Supreme Court decision, she went to this abortion clinic in Jackson, Mississippi, which was the heart of this decision.
Right.
And she said, she interviewed some people there, and she goes, people felt devastated. People felt upset. It was almost as if someone had died.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
They can't help themselves.
Yeah. Interesting choice of words there, I'd say, right? Of course, someone died there. It's an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
Anyways, putting that aside, the point, I mean, you're right. Or Whoopi Goldberg said on The View saying, I have a right to my body. It's between a woman, her doctor, and her child, she says. Did you hear that?
I never heard that one.
It just was yesterday on The View, these nitwits who, rambling about this decision.
I mean, Biden made some other Freudian slip about that when he was talking about abortion being a fundamental right, and it's not up to the government because we're all children of God. Hello.
Well, I mean, look, with him, nothing. It's all Looney Tunes. Every day it's. On the one hand, I feel sorry for him, propping him out there like that, because he obviously is in various stages of dementia, and half the stuff he says is just. look, I mean, my late father had dementia toward the end of his life. I mean, that's what this reminds me of. This is Looney Tunes. This is like,
Well, he wasn't president of the United States, though.
well, that's right. He wasn't. And, in a way, I mean, I feel there's something really wrong about them putting this man out there like that. But
Well, the family's made too much money off this guy, so why stop now?
The establishment saw him as a tool to stop Trump. I mean, we're not going to go too far into that.
Right.
And that look, I mean, hopefully, God willing, there's going to be a major change in November. Let's put it that way.
I think so.
It's only 6 months away. It's right. Yeah, 6 full months away, actually less than 6 months away now. And when we're going to have this election, and regardless of whether you think it was, quote, stolen, and I'm not commenting on that, you've got to get out to vote overwhelmingly, because assuming that there is cheating, if the vote is that big, it becomes much more difficult to steal an election. Not that they wouldn't try to do it. Already, you've got Soros pouring hundreds of millions of dollars. You've got Planned Parenthood, the day after the decision was leaked, spent about $150 million on the election under the guise of election integrity, right?
Right, yeah, correct.
So, yeah, they're going to try to do the same crap they did last time. I'm sorry. I mean, look, I'm not saying what they did. I'm just saying it's the same. If something is not dealt with in the beginning, it doesn't go away, because criminals continue to do what they do.
What is the motivation of Soros? I've never quite figured that out.
He's an internationalist, a Marxist. He's a world order. He has his point of view. He's determined to help create that, including crossing lines. In terms of financing things like Antifa and street action, and he's that's what he's doing. That's what he's about.
But isn't it pathetic, though, that a guy that old isn't just going to settle down with his family and to be involved in these sort of activities? I mean, isn't that pathetic, in the same way that Nancy Pelosi has to maintain her congressional seat? What's the point?
I know haven't they already made enough bucks off of this? I mean, I think in the case, Soros is grooming his son to take over.
Who's worse than he is?
That probably, but he might not be as smart as Soros. I don't know. But this is the same leftist agenda. These people are ideologues. That's all. Just to see what they are. I get into some of this in my book. I'm not going to go into details. But and I will mention the name of the book. It's available on Amazon. The Biden Coup. That's the name of the book. All right. The socio-political effects of an illegitimate regime. I hope I don't get in trouble. That Amazon did publish it.
That's right.
They published both the.
And I've already purchased it.
Thank you. They published both the ebook and the soft cover. They did not let me buy an ad campaign. I was going to spend a little bit of money each day putting an ad out there, and they said no to that. So, this is, there's still censorship going on there. But so far the book is available. It has been published. You can order it on Amazon. Just look it up. Put in my name, Charles Moscowitz, and you'll see it. So I already have at least one interview scheduled with Alex Newman from the New American. And he's got a pretty good following. So whatever. I'm trying to do what I can. I understand that a lot of people can't talk about this. So I'm going through alternative media to get interviews, like on Rumble and all. But so it's kind of like a grassroots thing, promoting it in this atmosphere. So
well, as we discussed, though, that there's going to be a certain market for it based on people that want to get other types of information. But it's always been like that. Then most people go with the flow, and very hard to convert them, although it's not impossible. And you just have to get this stuff out there.
That's
It's
all.
easier to get the stuff out there than 70, 80 years ago.
Well, look, I mean, I still have my ways. There are ways to do it. I mean, it requires a good deal of elbow grease, but it can be done.
Right.
And so I'm doing what I can. So what do you have coming up, Mike, in terms of your Substack and your writing?
Well, on the latest in the Substack was an analysis of the Supreme Court league. And one of the comments I made, I don't know why it's assumed that it had to be a law clerk.
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't it have been a liberal justice? Well, they wouldn't do. How do you know they wouldn't do?
Something, I don't think they would have done it because, I mean, I think that there's a liberal justice who's behind it. And I think I have an opinion as to who that is. But and I'll say who I think it is, Sotomayor. But that's
yeah. Well, but here's the thing. So now we're parsing words here. So if she's behind it and she gets one of her law clerks, I think they each have 4 clerks to do this.
Well, I think they do it the way the mafia used to work, right? They kind of like, they might leave it on the desk and they go like this, they move their head, It's like, it's like, what is the old saying in the mob movies? Don't say what you, what is it? Don't write what you can say. Don't say what you can nod.
Yeah.
You don't, I mean, obviously a Supreme Court justice can't be seen as doing this, right? I mean, Lyndon Johnson used to talk about this. He would say, don't talk about this to me in the White House. You see the park across the street, Lafayette Park, you go over there and you do it. And then you get back. I'm not going to have this conversation. In other words, there's an understanding on how the kind of the propriety of doing something like this.
Right.
They can't have their fingerprint on it. So, they just kind of nod and, there's something on my desk. And
I think you're right. I think that she'd be a good candidate. But the point is, it was done for political purposes, and I think it's going to backfire big time.
I agree. Yeah, I think it was done. I think maybe Roberts might have done it because he's sold out on everything practically since.
What a disaster that guy ended up being.
Yeah, I mean, and he even during Paxton versus Michigan, which basically Attorney General Paxton of Texas simply wanted the Supreme Court to look at the legal aspect of the state of Michigan and their Secretary of State making election laws from the office, and that put other states in jeopardy. A perfectly legitimate question for the Supreme Court to look at. What I've heard about this, and I have no idea, was that Roberts hit the roof and he said, he threatened the other judges. We're not doing this, and that's that. Especially the new ones, especially the Trump judges. You're going to get in line. We're not doing this one. So I don't know if that's true. Take it. It's just one of these things that's.
Well, I mean, he's been. It's certainly not an original theory. He's been subject to blackmail since the day he, literally the day, but soon after, with his very questionable adoption.
Yes, indeed, and and
here's the funny part: everybody knows about it. So how do you blackmail somebody about?
Well, at the time they didn't, and at the time, I mean, they say that it was Obama during Obamacare that was like you could have a problem and complications around your adoption if you don't do this, and there's also rumors, and I'm not going to get into specifics, that Roberts was. Let's just say he was seen on a certain island where people where people have flown in on a certain special airplane that kept logs of people there, and that there are pictures of him on this island. Let's just say that it could have been a compromising situation.
The thing that I didn't like about him from the jump was I've always hated people whose sole mission in life was to polish their resume.
That does describe him pretty openly.
I've never seen anyone, and I've been around for a few years, who did that to a greater degree than John Roberts.
Oh yeah, I mean, his main focus is his concern of the image of the Supreme Court Everything is how he's going to look in the history books, how he's
Well,
going
he's going to look pretty bad,
Yeah, I mean,
I think.
this is one of the fault. It's a foul. It's a fault. This is a corruption of any judge. I mean, even like when Nixon appointed Blackmun to the Supreme Court, and he had him over to the White House, he said, "Listen, you're going to be put under all kinds of pressure by liberals who are going to invite you and your wife to fancy dinner parties and cocktails, and are you really ready to withstand that?" And Blackmun's, "Oh yes, I don't care. I'm not going to." But apparently his wife wanted to be in society in Washington. She wanted to be accepted. Political pressure, I mean, personal pressure, social pressure is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're going to be accepted in polite society in Washington, you had to play ball with them. And I think that might have been what happened there.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is that they were supposed to be above all that because they were lifetime appointment.
That's right. They are supposed to be above it. And they're human beings, but one of the things, when you confirm a judge, you want to take a look at how objective they are. I mean, the whole idea, I mean, I don't, again, I want to be careful here. We'll kind of end on this note, but during the last election, across the board, state judges, federal, the Supreme Court, federal judges, they all said, well, we don't want to get involved in the election. We don't want to say anything or do anything that could affect the outcome of the election. To me, that showed how political they are. That is so despicable. They're supposed to be an independent branch of government that is outside of political considerations. They're supposed to look at the Constitution and the laws, not whether or not it's going to affect anything. To me, this is one of the most outrageous things in this whole thing. There was one judge in Wisconsin who was willing to see the Trump evidence. And he said, I'm not ruling on this because if I do, I'm going to be intervening into an election and I don't want to do that.
Well, I mean, but the thing is stupid about it is that by not intervening, you're intervening.
Exactly. That's totally political. They were taking political sides. They have to do what they do, whether you call it intervention or not. They're supposed to look at the law, period.
Well, who is a judge anyway? Let's be honest here. All right.
Right. They're a bunch of hacks who contributed money to some politician. In order
there may be people, a very
some of them are good. I don't want to be too general. There are some great judges out there.
But they come from the same crop. Okay. Who wants to be a federal judge? You're going to make what, 175,000, whatever it is. If you can't make 4 times that in a law firm, then what's wrong with you? You either have.
I don't know if I totally. I mean, I think it's a very powerful position and it's a great mission. I think it's more than just the money. I mean, and there are some great judges out there. I don't want to just. It's just that this last election really brought the whole judicial system, in my mind, in terms of who populates it, not the system itself, into real question. And it really was very discouraging to see how they behaved in that.
Well, but here's my point, Charles, that if they were really judges, they would have stood up and realized the importance of ruling on these sorts of questions.
No, they proved that they're just a bunch of political hacks, and Roberts is one of the worst. I mean, he cares about his image. He doesn't care about, the actual law.
And the more you care about your image, it's sort of ironic that the worse your image gets.
Exactly. That's right. Because, it's like the idea of self-esteem. You can't teach self-esteem. Self-esteem is a byproduct of doing something successfully. And they're just focused on, well, what does it look like, anyway. So where can people see your Substack?
Okay, so on Substack, it's the name of it is Mike's Point of View, but it's mdspov.substack.com, and a variety of things up there. So check it out.
Reviews. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mike. Listen, as always, I appreciate it.
It's always fun.
Yeah,
always good discussion.
Thank you. Same here. All right, I'll talk to you next week.